Good afternoon. My name is Gustavo Grandal Montero. I'm a librarian at the University of the Arts London. I'm also deputy editor of the Libraries Journal, and I will be the chair for this first panel of the afternoon. We will have three presentations, and we'll have questions at the end. So if you can save any questions for the end, please. The first presentation of the afternoon is by Laurence Byrne from Senate House Library, Leila, Kassit, also based at Senate House Library, and Hudda, Khaireh from Thicker Black Lines, and is called The Library Examine, a workshop collaboration with One of My Kind and Thicker Black Lines.
So, okay, our talk today is going to describe an induction that happened earlier this year at Senate House Library in January. It was called The Library Examined, and it was created by Hudda, who's going to be speaking later, Rose Nordin, Hibba Lamara, who are all from their art collectives, One of My Kind, who some of you may know as OOMK and Thicker Black Lines. So just to tell you how it's going to be today, I'm going to begin by a bit of scene setting, so describing what happens with the induction programmes at Senate House Library, and also a little bit of information about the library itself, if you don't know it. It's very near here, actually. You can see it just behind Russell Square. Laurence is then going to come up and talk about our reasons for approaching OOMK to work with us on creating a different type of induction. And then the larger part of the talk will be given by Hudda, who will be discussing in more detail the thinking behind the project and also how it was undertaken on the day. So just some information then. Laurence and we work as research librarians at Senate House Library. Senate House Library is the central library for the University of London, and it has a sort of twofold role. It is the main library for all of the researchers based at the School of Academics Advanced Studies, which is known as SAS, and then PhD researchers and early career researchers. And we're also an additional library for every federal college within the University of London. So we're talking about Birkbeck, UCL, King's, etc. Our research librarian roles are really varied and they're quite broad-ranging. They're subject-based, but within that, our jobs encompass collection development, researcher support, student support, and also the term engagement, which can mean so many things, and that's one of the sort of more difficult areas possibly to work with, and that's really what we're talking about today. But as with other academic libraries, one of the main ways we do try and engage with library readers is through the induction programme. And our rather unusual situation at Senate House Library means our inductions, by necessity, take on a variety of formats. So we host one-off visits for the members of the public, usually based around a theme, such as whatever our current exhibition is. We provide lots of one-to-one researcher support led by the PhD subject, so very much tailored to the individual. But we also see hundreds of students via general inductions for taught postgraduate students from the federal colleges. So for that latter group of students, it's a bit strange in that their home library, such as Birkbeck, is where they get their information skills sessions. We don't provide those. So the kind of inductions we're providing for them are more like show and tell, where we're saying these are the print, the E and the space resources that they can use. So therefore, they're very much the library worker giving the student information. We're saying this is what you can have, this is what you can do. So that's what we sort of end up doing. And in these, we are sort of in a position of authority then. We're sort of giving out information about the physical and theoretical idea of the library. And moving on to another slide here. So Senate House Library itself, for those of you who haven't actually been in it, is a very large library. It's got about 2 million books, modern collections dating from 1830, and our special collections going back some 500 years. And it's got diverse collections on a huge range of arts, humanities, and social science subjects, and lots of unique and very hard to locate items. The library building is well known in London, partly for its recurring role as a location for TV, film, and in literature, but also the library has many fans, myself included, of its winding staircases, the dark wood furniture, the hidden corners, and the many, many book stacks. That sort of space, however, is a formal one, and the 1930s building, which many of you know George Orwell used for the basis of his Ministry of Truth, can seem somewhat forbidding. The hidden corners that I described, they can be a refuge, but they can also be literally and metaphorically inaccessible. The layout of the stacks are over 4 floors, and it can be somewhat confusing, even to those of us who work there regularly. To add to that, we have 3 main classification systems. we have the Dewey, we have Library of Congress, but our main one, the primary one, is the rarely used and therefore the rarely experienced either by library workers or library users, Bliss. So this is an image here of Henry Bliss, a nice picture of him there, and he created this lovely system. And I'm just going to try and show you a web link very quickly of our online help guide, which I think just a quick glimpse will show you how hard it is to describe and use Bliss. It doesn't even work the same in different subjects. So in English, it's one relatively simple system. Once you get to history, though, it goes completely off the wall. So it's lots of letters, lots of numbers, capitals, lowercase. So we're working in that kind of environment too. So that's the kind of context we're working with. So in that environment, in that context, Laurence and I, considering the engagement aspect of our remit, we began to think about the people who do and don't come into the library, the many potential readers who do not attend our what is essentially voluntary inductions. So these are the many people that we've worked with. So we've worked recently with a group called Open Book. And they are based within Goldsmiths, one of the federal colleges, and they do really wonderful work supporting marginalised adults into higher education. So we've been working with them on some other projects recently, and we were also aware that there are numerous groups of potential library readers already within the university who are currently not joining it or using it fully. For instance, there's lots of outsourced workers on outsourced contracts who maybe aren't using the library, and local community groups. So through such connections and many other experiences, including our own personal ones, we know that libraries, particularly traditional appearing ones such as Senate House, can be extremely daunting places to step into, let alone use. So we therefore began discussing ways in which we could create a library induction workshop, which would begin to challenge some of these barriers, or in the very least, a way that we could critically explore them in what we hope was an engaging manner. And now Laurence is going to talk a bit more about how we went about doing that.
Okay, hi. So as Leila mentioned, the starting point of our thinking was that in the induction situation, the librarian is deemed to be the authoritative voice, or at least the channel through which the authority of the library is delivered to the readers. And despite however much we as librarians might attempt to think critically about our work, we began through our conversations to recognize that daily exposure to the library environment puts us in a position of privilege and authority, whereby our comfort in that environment inevitably results in some level of complicity in its structures. So then we asked ourselves the question, would librarians therefore, in fact, be the best people to lead on an induction? Leila had worked previously with Hibba, Hudda, and Rose, and we were therefore aware of their creative and dedicated work in library and archive spaces, and particularly their critical understanding of the politics of knowledge within libraries, as well as their community focus. So we felt that they were in an ideal position, as they have the skills and knowledge relating to libraries. They're very immersed in library theory, critical theory, but they're not hampered by this complacency of working in a specific library every day. So we began with meetings and discussions with Hibba, Hudda, and Rose about the library, and then the workshop itself and the content was designed entirely by them. We talked about it, but we didn't interfere too much, I don't think. I don't know. We can talk about that later. So really, the role of the librarian shifted from being this authoritative voice to being more of like, we were just trying to convince our management that this was worthwhile, which, you know, that's very important too. So our role was to ensure that Hibba, Hudda, and Rose were provided with paid research time in order to put their knowledge to work in the specific context of Senate House Library. So this involved a lot of form filling, attending meetings with like management, and convincing them of the value of the project, and really specifically getting this paid research time, making them understand how fundamental that was to the whole project, because they're experts coming from outside the library, so they need to bring that knowledge to bear in some way, and that takes time. So funding was eventually secured through internal library budgets. So that's under the remit of engagement, which Leila mentioned, this kind of vague term. Plus, we were able to secure funding for the materials we needed and for space for the workshop and time for conducting that on the day itself. So as I said, the role of the librarian became more of an administrator, helping to navigate the bureaucracy of the library and the wider University of London. With that secured, we invited 3 groups to participate in the workshop. Open Book, which Leila mentioned, based at Goldsmiths, Marchment Community Centre, which is just down the road, and the Independent Workers of Great Britain, which is a union based, well, we have a branch at the University of London. As we felt these groups represent people who are present within the university or the local community, but who for various reasons the library fails to sufficiently engage with. For instance, many of the cleaning, portering, security staff at the university speak Spanish as their first language. I'm the librarian for Latin American Studies, so it's something that particularly interests me, and we have large Spanish language collections. However, the structure of the university currently prevents them from accessing collections of potential value to them, and this is a mutual loss, as we hope the workshop will begin a dialogue between the library and these groups. You know, we feel that it's essential for us as librarians that we make our collections visible and accessible so that people have a choice of whether or not they wish to use them, wish to engage with them. At the moment, there's no option, basically. Unfortunately, only people from Open Book attended this workshop this time. So we have ideas on how to improve this, where we might have gone wrong. I think the main problem is there wasn't time to have full Spanish interpretation of this, but that's something that we can work on in the future. So we held the workshop on a Saturday, which obviously put up barriers for people to attend. Community groups generally don't meet at weekends. Community workers don't work at the weekend, and many of the outsourced staff have second jobs or family commitments at the weekends. And the final thing I wanted to say is that this is kind of selfish, but the workshop was designed to be a learning experience for the librarians as well, the induction, enabling us to see the place that we work every day through different perspectives. So it became an induction for us, led by Hudda, Hibba, and Rose, whereby we were both librarians and participants, in that we presented a short introduction to the library and its classification systems, Bliss, etc. And we're also on hand to answer any questions relating to these systems. But we also actively took part as participants. I think you can see me gingerly kind of involved. So this enabled us as librarians to learn from both Hibba, Hudda, and Rose, OOMK, and the other participants. And it was essential that it was designed in such a way as to deconstruct, to a larger extent, the hierarchies that normally exist within the library and are normally reproduced through library inductions. Okay, so I think Hudda's going to speak now.
Hello everyone, I'm Hudda. Yes. So we started the publicity for this workshop with this quote. I believe the subtext here is rapidly becoming the text. Any of you that remember the fantastic show Buffy the Vampire Slayer will have immediately the image of Giles, the librarian, in his beautiful hallowed stacks, sharing with Buffy and co-vampire slaying people's information and all the sort of fun things about that show. But the reason why we use this quote is because I think it goes to the heart of what the workshop was about, really exposing the context behind, the subtext behind the sort of information, knowledge that the library claims to be repository of, and understanding that the library too frames the way in which that knowledge is understood and how people are able to access that knowledge. I belong to two research art collectives. One of My Kind, Zine, which is the pictures at the bottom. It's a small press publication run by Muslim women, designed to showcase the art, spirituality, creativity, activism of women of color and women generally. So I think half the submissions are of women of color, and the rest are from other women, from whatever they choose to identify themselves with. But we specifically look at the issue of race and raciality and how that impacts how we're understood as women of color, and the way in which our gendered identities is somehow confused by the fact that we're in these racialized bodies. This is an area that I've been involved in researching for a long time. And the second collective I'm a part of, Thicker Black Lines, is specifically a black feminist collective that looks at the way in which the black female subject is positioned in the world, and using art specifically as this vehicle to think about and explain and explore the idea of subjectivity. How is it that we arrive, are understood in the world, and the ways in which black female subjectivity seems to be a misnomer and misunderstood or erased positionality in not just art, although we use that art as our prism in the world and theology in general. This workshop, I think, we tried to sort of talk about both of those aspects in there. So this project, The Library Examined, follows on from a text that OOMK created, that members of Thicker Black Lines submitted to, called The Library Was. It came from a project that OOMK had been a paid residency that we had in a former library that now become into an art space that I think now is going to be some sort of private home or something in East London. You know the drill. And the ways in which libraries across the country are being taken away from public ownership and public purview, and the kind of information that was how that impacts our lives. So the original emphasis of the project was thinking about the future of libraries, coming to this new epoch now of cuts left, right, and centre, and the way in which the public sphere has been radically reduced. But we took it as an opportunity to think, perhaps not even about the future, but also reconsider the past, about what our relationship with libraries were and what libraries can be, what radical futures that we can think about, or possibilities, without being encumbered by preserving this old library system. So one of the contributors to that was Leila, and so that's a little piece there. And myself and Rihanna Jade Parker had an interview dialogue talking about our relationships with Lambeth libraries and our childhood there, and the kind of the issues that were always present in libraries, which was that us as two black women not being able to find stories about ourselves, and why that was necessarily the case given our society's understanding of what is valuable knowledge to share, and the ways in which the library is one of the primary spaces of reproducing knowledge production, and ways in which the knowledge is a part of the structures of power, and therefore reproduces hierarchies of beings. So that story about hierarchies of beings is something that we explored further in the workshop. But I've got a slide here of a text that we found to be really useful in the kind of the conceptualization of the workshop. So I'll have that up there. You can read, I'll give you the references of it, but really it's up there for me. So I'm gonna just talk to you a bit more about what the aim of the workshop was, what our expressed aim was. Yeah, so the induction really was to help users navigate the library, but also with an understanding of how things are placed, and being critical about that placement. And in that criticality, understanding how the library is a space that reproduces the same structures and dynamics available in society writ large. And so rather than being this neutral repository, is an actor in that. we had the pleasure of having a wonderful presentation by Leila and Laurence speaking about the history of Senate House Library and sort of the very idiosyncratic ways in which the library collection were created, ostensibly by donations by wealthy individuals who, and those being the foundations by which then the library was able to expand upon afterwards. The University of London, as a university founded during the colonial era of the British expansion, it's literally the bricks and mortar, as is this whole area in Bloomsbury and London and the UK finds its the material wealth in which it was created from. The colonial adventures that Britain undertook. So we spoke about the year 1492 and Christopher Columbus finding the New World and the ways in which that is an ontological era, as in changes the way in which people lived in the world. There, Europe being this place that is the center of knowledge, in which the European phenotype is understood to be the norm, and all other peoples in which Europeans came into contact with afterwards being that which has been judged against. So this idea of categorization and difference is always embodied in a structure of power. And therefore the library being this having a classificatory logic underpins this. And so we wanted to, throughout the kind of the way in which we established the workshop, to really destabilize this idea of these categories are given categories and understand them as created categories with a purpose. And therefore, if you feel a way about why is it that I can't find out this place and this doesn't really feel intuitive, understand it's because it's not supposed to be. And that if you feel destabilized behind her, if you feel a way, it's because you're meant to, that there is reproducing who gets to be knowledgeable and who's not knowledgeable. So let me whiz through this. We gave people 8 random samples, and it's not actually 8. We had after we had our time in Senate House Library looking across the stacks, we decided that we wanted to pick out 8 examples of why the text and the ways in which the texts are classified help us understand the kind of inequality of society that we live in. So I always start with Hegel, because Hegel is someone that I think, especially if you don't come from a critical theory background or philosophical background, is someone whose name goes over your head. But his theories really underpin and illustrate to us why the world looks the way it does. So we asked people to find this text of Hegel. The library catalogue has 1,191 entries of Hegel alone. Books, literally, he is the focus of them. And his work is translated text in the philosophy section, so it's not found only, he's a German philosopher that's not only found in the German section, but his work permeates every single area, from sociology, psychology, psychoanalysis, critical theory, all these types of things. Hegel, as sort of a father of Enlightenment thought and liberalism, had very specific ideas about what knowledge is and the idea of the transcendental and reproducing understandings of racialized people. So the famous quote about knowledge starts in the East and finds its epoch in Europe, but misses Africa out entirely. And the kind of ways in which the Negro figure is talked about in liberal philosophy. And so despite the fact that we have, socialist readings like Marx, and we have like liberals and capitalists like Adam Smith, both of them share Hegel as their father. So the ways in which even in European thought trying to be a criticality, it's still, there's a shared understanding of what race does in terms of understanding human difference. We showed text, we gave another example of the way the kind of classificatory logics of the library. So, sorry, with Hegel, the way in which Hegel is just completely naturalized in the library stacks, that his work is everywhere because he's that important. But it's so important, then there's no specificity. So this is an important Hegelian. There's not even just they could just have a different section, Hegel. and be done with it. But no, he's everywhere. Other ways in which knowledge, kind of the ways in which the library tells us different ways about knowing. There's a text here on the structure of cotton economy in the American South. This text is found on the 6th floor in US Studies and Textiles. It's a text specifically about slavery and way slavery as an economic structure links with US history. These texts, if you look to work, there's a sociology has this sort of area of slavery, and it's literally like the other side of the library. So you wouldn't be able to link these two things together conceptually. Again, we had another book by Miriam Barr speaking about, it's one of the really important texts that is a Senegalese text that's written in French, that's, in French literature, that speaks specifically to the history of colonization of knowledge production. How is it that works can be shared in the world? How is this important literary text about a community not able to be written in the indigenous language of the community, but written in a so-called universal language of French, which, of course, its universality is a result of violent, structure of slavery and colonialism. Nyong'o Thiong'o, who's a famous, you guys are librarians, you know who he is, speaks about the ways in which African literature can only be recognized if it's not written in African languages. We had other text. So this is a really beautiful one. Oh no, did I not put it on there? Okay, never mind. So there's a beautiful section in the library about music and the ways in which, how do you write about lyrical work? And actually there's physical collection of records and things like that the Senate House has. We have some more books about the ways in which different subjects' positions are framed in the library. So one that we found to be completely illustrative of what we're talking about, The Psychology of Women and Psychoanalysis Perspectives, which is found in Psychology, is written, sort of the text is about gender and sexuality, but the ways in which the system categorizes it is under defects, almost. I think I've forgotten the term, but the kind of its subtext under this is issues of loneliness, imprisonment. So the idea of a female subjectivity, a book that's focused on female subjectivity, is understood as being some sort of issue or problematized, like already problematized, which kind of shows you the understanding of how do we think about women in society, that women are deviant from the normative, which is the male. And so, of course, necessarily under the logics of the library system, it will be understood, female gender will be understood as that. But also that female is always already gendered, as if male isn't always gendered. So when you look up text about gender, majority of it would be about female gender, which then it shows about how conceptually, how do we think about male gender or other types of genders. And so they're nice pictures. And then also about the magazines and things like that, and what kind of text goes inside the library. So these are the questions that we ask people to think about once we gave them the task of finding the book. And we had little bookmarks that's up there. We can pass it around, and hopefully it doesn't interrupt other people's, although I think I'm over time. So the whole project was about also putting in a tactility and intuitating yourself in the library. So we've talked about the kind of the logics that would necessarily make people feel separate to being in the library. That there is oftentimes, and from our own experiences as library users, but also just thinking about the ways in which the library is structured, that there is a normative that goes into the library, and the library replicates this concept of normativity in the ways in which it classifies things. So those of us who don't follow that concept of normativity and are not well versed in the ways that the library operates, will find this place very confusing. We wanted people to feel that they could just explore, that there isn't that the logics of the library are oftentimes illogical and oftentimes hierarchical, and replicating difference, replicating this idea of those that have knowledge, those that don't have knowledge. And so we wanted people to build these critical questions, think about like how things are published, who wrote the book, really just to feel like that this is an object of study in and of itself, rather than be a project or a text, a knowledge that you have to be received and has to be accepted on its own terms. From then, we took photocopies of each of the books and asked people to create a new text, a new piece of knowledge from this. Again, we were thinking about the concept of knowledge and the ways in which oftentimes knowledge is understood as being this kind of, especially in academic knowledge, as this independent, created project of enlightened thought that's unique to only you, rather than thinking of knowledge as a collective endeavor and supported by many different sources, and that we create knowledge from these experiences. So we created this book where we encourage people to do lots of different things with the text, to create a new text. We also have a copy of the book here with you that you can have a look at. And so again, at the end, we wanted people to feel like a tactility towards the text, but also to recognize that the space as one that's always already telling a story to you, and therefore it's a story that you can accept, or you can be subversive with, or take what you need from, but as a resource first and foremost, not to feel alienated by the space, but rather understand that it is alienating. Okay, so I'm sorry if I overran, but we've got questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hudda and Leila and Laurence. That was great, and thank you for sharing such an important project, really. Next up is Stephanie Moran from INIVA, Stuart Hall Library. She will have a conversation with the artist Ting, Cheng, and the presentation is called On the Desert Island. And it's a live Skype conversation, so it's the first for the conference ever. So fingers crossed all will go well. Stephanie.
Hey, so I'm Stephanie Moran. This is Ting Cheng, who is our first artist in residence. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick intro, and then we're going to play the pre-recorded conversation that we had. So for those of you who don't know, INIVA is an evolving radical visual arts organisation dedicated to developing an artistic programme that reflects on the social and political impact of globalisation. The Stuart Hall Library is INIVA's critical and creative hub. We engage a wide audience, and especially interested in young people, in the discourse and debate on issues surrounding the politics of race, class, and gender. This is a picture of Ting. Ting can't see this. So Ting Cheng was selected from an open call for proposals for our first residency in the Stuart Hall Library. We were looking specifically for artists with at least 5-year track record. You can see some of her biography there. This is a shortened version of her biography. She was born in Taipei in 1985 and completed an MA in photographic studies at the University of Westminster in 2009, and then an MFA in fine art at Goldsmiths in 2014. Okay, and then I'm going to start playing the film now, I think, and then I'll flick through some more of the images of her piece of work while the film's playing. Ting's here so she can answer questions during the panel discussion later as well.
So, first of all, what made you want to apply for residency? What first attracted you to it?
I remember when I found out about the residency, I was really excited. First, I really like INIVA. I've been following their program since I moved to London in 2008. I really like the exhibition they curated, and I also know they organize really, really interesting conference talks, collaboration, etc. And I'm really happy to see an opportunity from them. And not to mention that, secondly, Professor Stuart Hall is my favorite writer and theorist. I believe his writing influenced my practice a lot, and I'm really happy that I could have a chance to work with Stuart Hall Foundation and Stuart Hall Library. I was really excited about that. And thirdly, I really, really like library. Library is just my favorite place. First, I love how quiet it is, how much research I can do. Before the artist residency here at Stuart Hall Library, I also made several projects, either in relation with library or using library as a concept, etc. So I feel like this is a combination with all my interests, and my favorite institutions. And not to mention the financial support was very fairly as well. So I got really, really excited. I was telling myself and my friends that I just had to apply it. I remember that, and I'm really glad that I could work with them at the end. Yes.
Great. And could you talk a bit about the finished piece of work you made, or talk us through the piece that you made?
Yes. So the work I made is called On the Desert Island. And so I'm sure most of people here were familiar with the radio show Desert Island Disc on BBC Radio. And the presenter at the time was Sue Lawley, and Professor Ho was invited to share, in a way, his life and his story and 8 records that he would like to bring if he was cast away on the desert island. And so, as people are familiar with the show, I'm sure you can imagine that what they were talking about. They did talk a lot about Professor Ho's personal life, but in a way, they also talk a lot about the future and the past of the country, in terms of things like racial conflict, the Britishness, the identity of British, what does it mean, in relation with colonization, imperialism, and Stuart Hall was also talking about it's possible to be black and British at the same time, etc. Again, and all these topics are highly connected with his personal life as well, so that everything is intertwined. And so the work on the desert island is based on this radio show. And I made an audio walk tour. So basically, when audience arrive at the library, if they want to see the word, they will be given a headphone. And then there's a starting point in front of reception, and with the headphone, there's a voiceover, which is the voice of Susan, which is one of the librarians at Stuart Hall Library. And the voiceover was giving direction as the voice of your head, you as the listener, as the audiences. It started as you're here, but you don't know why you're here. A moment ago, you were just at a library, and suddenly you don't recognize this place anymore. And so basically, there's a script what I wrote. You are, as a listener, you're also casted on a desert island, and you don't know why you're here. You kind of can't remember who you are. And you're trying to figure out where is this place, how to get out of it. At the same time, you're trying to figure out why you're here, who you are. And so it's a journey, basically. And the whole journey is 50 minutes. And in the direction, for example, the voiceover will say, for example, look left, turn left, you will see something, and then you turn right into this aisle, and then you reach to a certain book, with the title of the book, and you open up to page 76, you find certain item inserted. So basically, there are more than 30 objects and 12 books installed in the library in every corners and shelves and everywhere. And everything that's audiences are encountering, such as books, text within the books, objects, pictures, everything they encounter are all related to the topic they were talking about and related to the storyline as well, like as audiences exploring where is this place. And so, at the end, you start to realize that this is a story about you as a listener and the place you live now. And you start realizing where is this island, and you start realizing probably who you are and where this doesn't matter. It's about what it could be in a way. So it's this circle around the island and the library. And at the end, you end up at the reception again. And so this is the work.
Great. I mean, it was an amazing piece of work in the way that it responded to not just the collection, but the way the collection was laid out in the library. But how did you actually develop your proposal for the application? What made you think about it? What made you? Was it something that just came to you, or did you work with the collection for a while?
So I remember how I started with the proposal. and I was sitting in front of the laptop at home, and then I realized how silly it was because, fortunately I live in London, because not every time you can visit the actual residency place before the application, because when it's different city or even in different country. So yeah, fortunately I was in London, so I decided I wanted to give just to go visit the space. I think there's nothing better than physically visiting the space to think about the proposal, and not only the space itself, to know what collection, just to familiarize with everything. So yeah, so I went to Stuart Hall Library at Shoreditch, and I remember I was started as very simple, intuitive search of what collection that's related to Professor Hall are in the collection, such as books and everything. And very, very luckily, I think the first thing attracted my eyes was an audio archive of Desert Island Disc, which was aired in year 2000, which I didn't mention in the previous question. So yeah, and I remember Susan, again, the librarian I mentioned, who was there, and I asked her where do I find it, and she was very helpful. She gave me this tape with this tape Walkman and headphone, and I remember, and I think this experience definitely influenced the proposal, at the end, the project a lot, because it was a really, really interesting experience. I remember I couldn't find where the show is, because I think the whole tape actually taped it longer than the show itself. And it was this really nostalgia feeling of tape and the feeling of listening to almost very private, not really private, but it's a two people conversation in the public space. And I was really moved by the conversation, but no one else understand why was I moved, because everyone else, I was reading their own thing. So you feel like you're the only person experiencing something, I wanted to share, but I'm the only one person listening to this. And I think this experience actually moved me a lot. I really like this feeling of you're between private conversation and the public space. So I think, and it leads to this project, like I mentioned, this personal experience, this personal journey in a public space.
Okay. So when you actually started making the work, how did your library research feed into your practice, and what was your research process?
So in a way, research is really important for this project, because I need to find appropriate related books from the collection and to insert it in a certain point of this journey. So it's particularly important. It's almost the work itself. And so basically, I believe I keep the original order of the radio show. I did take one song, one bit out, but apart from that, I kept the original order. And there's another thing I forgot to mention in the previous questions, that there's a way through the library are categorizing the exhibition catalogs that I found really, really interesting. Is based on geographical location and nations. So you see UK, Europe, South America, but also individuals like Brazil, Jamaica, Asia, Japan, etc. And I found that really interesting, and that influenced this project a lot as well, because when I was in the library, I felt like I'm in a way on this globe almost, you're traveling from one place to another, and it's like this island. So yeah, so first is my research process. First is the order of the topic and the song. And the second thing I decided was they were talking about, so it started as reception, and then the first stop was UK, and then goes to Jamaica. It's quite easy decision because this is what they were talking about. And then I wanted to go back to some shelves related to theories and some books related to the topic, and then all the way back to UK and then back to reception. So with these structures, I started my research process. And I also didn't move the original locations of the book apart from one of them, because I think that was also an important thing for me. I think I want to make a work that's invisible, that's hidden within this library. And so I don't want to ruin this original rhythm of things. So I really try not to move any book So everything was still functional as it's supposed to be. People can still, using a search engine, find a book in the right place. So I think within this structure, this is how I started my research point, and then I needed to read a lot of books. So basically, I have a certain topic in a certain area. So because the route is decided, so this topic needs to be in this shelf, or at least the nearby shelf. And so within this range, I need to find the appropriate books that's related to the topic. So there were lots of readings, and it was difficult at some point, of course. So basically, I think not only I needed to find books that's related to the topic, I think it's also important to find text. I feel I want to offer a background of the conversation. Like, not only, I don't want to be a repetition of the conversation. I hope it could be like offering the information that's lacking, like filling the gaps between the words, become the backgrounds to make audiences to relate the library to the conversation and to think further beyond this. But fortunately, I think the collection of Stuart Hall Library is very related to the things they were talking about. So although there's some limitation because the idea I had, but I believe I managed to find the right book for the right part, and I really enjoy the research process and the readings.
Yeah, it was really great the way that you related the material in the books, and you extended the material in the books, in fact, by putting in inserts and sort of reflecting on it. So the listener sort of goes on this journey with you and reads the things and sees things that you've inserted in the books. INIVA and the Stuart Hall Foundation provided a residency fee of $3,750 for 3 months, plus a £750 materials budget. And this was for a 3-month low residency project. I think we expected sort of 2 days a month minimum, and an artist with at least 5 years track record. How does it compare with other artist residencies that you've done or that are offered, and do you think it's adequate?
And okay, so first, I believe it's adequate for me. I really appreciate it, and I'm very thankful for that. And yeah, this is actually one of the, I think it is the example I used lately when I'm talking to other people about like how I hope all the residencies can be. And especially where I'm at now, I'm in Taiwan. And so basically I think there are different types of residency, and some of them is like the one I had at INIVA, Stuart Hall Library, and founded by Stuart Hall Foundation and INIVA. And so with like budget and artist fee. And some of them is free. So, by free I mean like they offer you probably place to live or studio, depends on, sometimes artists travel to different cities, so there's accommodation and studio, but there's no budget. And some of them I heard, I never participated because I found it a bit unfair, is artists that actually charge artists. Because in a way I understand, because there's a cost of running artist in residency, and without funding, actually a lot of institutions cannot survive by offering everything for free. So some of the residency actually charge artists for rent or for administration, etc. So yeah, I really believe it's adequate. The artist fee makes me able to not work even part-time for the 3 months. I can fully commit to the project itself, and still having the budget that I can work on the project. And the other thing I encountered in some other institutions in the past is some of the, mainly I think in Taiwan from my experience, lots of budget, there's only one budget without separating artist fee and budget. And this amount of money you need to provide receipt. So they're more like production costs, but I think the concept of artist fee is not actually very common in some places. So I think, I understand that it's difficult for institutions to survive, especially there are lots of family cuts, etc. But I really appreciate that there's artist fee for artists, so you can, survive, because it's not a production fee. we do need to survive in some way. So that makes me that I don't need to work any other part-time job, full-time job, so I can commit to it. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Great. But in practice, you were actually in the library for many more than the sort of paid days that we budgeted for. If there was a larger budget, how long would your ideal residency have been, and what work would you have liked to make?
I think this really depends on different artists, but for me, I actually think 3 months are quite perfect. I think at the end, I worked a bit longer. I think I worked all the way until like half of the 4th month, or even at the end. But yeah, but in a way, I was away for a week and a half, I think, because I pre-arranged some trips. So I actually think it was okay. I didn't think it was too short, and I like the fact that I knew how long I have, so I can structure my time, and I can also plan the project. I wouldn't be, extremely ambitious when we do something. It would take 6 months or a year. So for me, I think 3 months is an okay time. I guess 4 or 5 months would be fine, but I'm totally fine with 3 months. And I wouldn't make anything different. I really like the project I made, and this is a fun proposal, and I delivered what I wanted to do. And I guess me and Stephanie were talking about the other day as well, that if there is more budget, I guess if like VR documentation is possible, that would be amazing. And I guess, that's the only thing I could think of. But in a way, like I think I will still do the project that I did, even with more budget, and just with probably better documentation.
And final question, what did you enjoy most about the residency?
First, I think the show is amazing. And if anyone hasn't heard about the show, I really recommend it. It's still available on the BBC website. And so it's really, really interesting and moving and touching conversation. And I didn't mention earlier, I'm really grateful like Stuart actually had a chance to visit the work at the library. So I had a personal conversation with her. She's amazing. And I think she asked really, really sharp questions in the conversation, and which provoke, in a way, Professor Ho to explain further about what he's thinking, and lots of personal questions in a way. And also, Professor Ho has this amazing music taste, and the songs are really, really good. So I think that's one thing I really enjoy working on this project, because I needed to listen to this show over and over again, writing transcript and organizing the thought, research, and everything, to the point like I remembered all the lines, with everything. But actually listening to the show it's a pleasure. Like I didn't feel like it was annoying that I had to listen to over and over again. And the other part I really enjoyed was the research itself. And I believe there's nothing better than you're paid to read and doing research in a place with Wi-Fi and sunlight and quietness. And for me, I think as an artist, research is actually my favorite part. Sometimes putting research into practice, it's amazing too, it's really exciting, but you are almost bound to encounter things that you struggle with. I think this is the life of artists, sometimes not everything works in the way you want it to be, and you need to fight with these obstacles and things in the process of making. But in a way, research is almost like an escape for me, that this is the safe part. Like it can't go wrong because you're learning and reading, and I just really love the process of research. So, yeah.
Thank you, brilliant.
Thank you, and sorry I can't be there, and I'm really happy to see you guys in this way. Probably will see you in the QA later. I'll be alive. Okay, bye.
Great.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to add, Ting?
I don't, not at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, so Ting will be hanging out during the whole session so she can answer questions in the panel later. I suppose the thing to say is her residency was last year. It's the first residency we did in the Stuart Hall Library. and the audio work that she produced for it was available in the library to listen to for 6 months after that and to experience. And we're currently thinking about ways that we can archive it and funding for archiving it, more importantly. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Ting. It's always inspiring to hear about artist residencies, and this is a very interesting one. So our last speaker for the panel is Kraig Binkowski, and he is from the Yale Center for British Art. He's going to be talking about the ARIAH-RIHA Professional Exchange Fellowship, first-hand perceptions of London art libraries in the early 21st century.
Thanks very much, Gustavo, and thank you all for coming today. So in the spring of 2017, I was fortunate enough to receive the ARIAH-RIHA Professional Exchange Fellowship that allowed me to travel to London to conduct research there for a month. Ting gets to enjoy our there as well.
I can move it now.
Oh, it doesn't matter to me.
Sorry.
The ARIAH-RIHA Fellowship is open to museum professionals, non-curators, from either an ARIAH or RIHA member. ARIAH is the Association of Research Institutes in Art History, with members primarily in North America, and RIHA is the International Association for Research Institutes in the History of Art, with membership in Europe and Australia. ARIAH and RIHA were awarded a grant by the Crest Foundation to support a one-month stay for professional staff at one of these institutions. The goal of the exchange is to foster communication and an exchange of ideas and expertise on topics such as the creation of digital tools, collections management, conservation, publishing, and archival procedures. My proposal enabled me to take a close look at the collections, services, and clientele of several important art libraries in London. And while I looked at many aspects of the libraries, my presentation here will focus on the photo archive collections that are part of many of these art libraries. The photo archive in my own institution and our efforts towards digitization and a commitment to open access made my close examination of similar collections in London particularly relevant. I wished to see how other libraries were handling similar situations and challenges, and if we shared even a common understanding of these types of collections. I formulated a set of questions that I posed to the keepers of London Art Library collections to help me understand the current status and state of individual photo collections, how they are used and how they might be used, who are the users of your collections, how are students and staff introduced to them, how is collection development performed, has the content undergone collection analysis, what types of bibliographic instruction do you undertake, and many more along those lines. I wanted to create a snapshot of several art libraries in London, but to also extrapolate those findings to some conclusions about the current field of photo archives in London and in general. But first, as a little background and context, the Reference Library and Archives at the Yale Center for British Art, which I'm in charge of, houses a photo archive of nearly 140,000 black and white photos of British works of art from collections around the world, both public and private. In its heyday in the mid-1980s, there were 3 dedicated photo catalogers who were adding nearly 10,000 photographs to the collection each year. Photo archives were historically an unique, important visual tool for art historians. However, the growing ubiquity of art images online precipitated a swift descent into relative obscurity for many photo archive collections. Collections such as ours that had no digital visual component and for which access was limited to physically pulling photo boxes from metal shelves suffered grievously from the explosion of the internet. When I started at the center in 2005, the catalogers had already been reassigned and no new photos were being acquired for the archive. Use of the photo archives by center staff had slowed to a trickle of diehards, not an actual staff member. Most students didn't know that the archives existed, and those that did had no concept of how it could be used. Library staff did recognize the continued importance of the photo archive, and we include it in all staff and scholar orientations, as well as in class bibliographic instruction. And while the use of the collections remains steady, it has never reached the levels of use it had just a decade before. In 2013, the YCBA came together with 13 international institutions and formed a consortium of photo archives that was dedicated to reinventing how these collections could be used in art historical research. The group, called Pharos, recognized the inherent importance of these collections, as well as the opportunity in an online and linked data environment to greatly enhance discovery and to facilitate research. In the wake of the Center's unveiling of its own policy of open access to images and information, the YCBA began a project to digitize its photo archive collection of 140,000 images. This is the collection being readied for shipment to the Netherlands. Our project married high-resolution images with rich metadata records, with the goal to make them available to the widest possible swath of users and uses. In conjunction with the main tenets of Pharos and our own open access policy, access to these images would be free of charge, and discovery and wider connections would be augmented by linked open data. So, in December of 2017, I bundled up and headed to chilly London, hard to imagine, just as Christmas decorations were going up on Oxford Street and throughout London. My fellowship was centered at the Courtauld Institute, where the staff of the digital media department was endlessly patient with my questions and always ready to include me in meetings and events at the Institute. Somerset House, as you know, is a beautiful neoclassical building and the original home of the Royal Academy. Its entrance faces the Strand to the north, and its southern edge straddles the Thames. During the colder months, a wonderful inner courtyard serves as a temporary ice skating rink, and this was in full swing when I arrived in the early days of winter. My carrel and workspace was situated on a staff mezzanine in the photo archive collections, complete with a window that at times would shower me in natural light, a rare commodity in London in December. And it also afforded me muffled sounds of gleeful skaters in the courtyard. My space was amongst the digital media staff of the Courtauld, who were tasked with digitizing the entire Witt and Conway photographic collections, as well as other collections in the museum. My plan for the fellowship was to use the Courtauld as my main base of operations and to travel for day trips or multiple day trips to other London institutions. This made sense for a couple of reasons. The Courtauld has arguably one of the most extensive and important photo archive collections in the world, and they had already been working for quite a while on solutions to providing access in a digital form to their massive holdings. Secondly, the Courtauld is a research institute, a museum, and an institution of learning, all of which corresponds very closely with the tenets of my own institution at Yale. Lastly, the Courtauld's location on the Strand made it conducive to easy travel to other institutions. Along with my time at the Courtauld, I visited the Paul Mellon Center, the National Gallery, the National Portrait Gallery, the Royal Academy, and the Chelsea College of Arts, University of London. In all instances, I found my hosts to be very helpful and extremely generous of their time, and not to mention patience, as we picked through photo archive boxes and other visual collections, and I picked through their brains about collections and services. The questions I sought to answer about photo archives included their current states and use, future digital projects, how access is provided, and who are the major stakeholders within the institutions. But there were really three larger concepts that all the questions revolved around. What is the current state and use of the photo archives? What are the future and potential uses of the photo archives? And how are photo archives understood institutionally? How are they discovered? By looking at these three central ideas through the lens of several of the most important art libraries in London, I hope to more fully understand the ingrained and changing perceptions of photo archival and visual collections. What is the current state and use of the photo archives? Or does anyone really comb through these dusty boxes? I found the answer varied widely from institution to institution. Not surprisingly, those collections that are leaders in the field, the National Portrait Gallery's Hines Archive and Library with its renowned sitter and artist boxes, and the Courtauld's Witt and Conway collection are all still used regularly by a variety of researchers and scholars. However, not surprisingly, the use of these collections has diminished in recent decades, and indeed, those institutions with smaller and more focused photo archive collections have found that their use has stagnated. Smaller collections are rarely used by anyone inside the institution or out. The Paul Mellon Center's collection is growing, having added the Tate's photographic archive to its own, yet use is still a trickle of what had been in past decades. The very fact that the scholars at the Tate decided that their archive was not worth keeping, let alone updating, speaks volumes to how contemporary curators and scholars have come to view these collections. Many photo archive collections are no longer growing, and staff dedicated to them have been reduced drastically. The largest and most established collections still have dedicated users, though their makeup has shifted from scholars and art historians to art dealers and commercial interests. Collectors, who in many cases created the original photo archive collections, no longer use these resources at all. So who are the future and potential users of these archives, or will anyone ever open these boxes again? Thinking about current and future users of these photo archive collections puts them in stark relief to their past users. Photo archives have a celebrated history as the earliest methods for art historians to study faithful reproductions, so it was thought, of paintings in far-flung collections and even farther-flung continents. The use of the emerging field of photography to document works of art was a landmark moment in art history, and photography would forever be interwoven into the fabric of art history's development as a discipline in the second half of the 19th century. As early as 1873, the renowned art historian Wilhelm Lübke wrote, "To no technical aid of the present time is art history so indebted as it is to photography." Importantly, photography had taken the hand of the artist out of the study of art history. That is, the hands of the engraver or the painter who created copies of art were no longer needed to compare and interpret works of art visually. Photographic reproductions of works of art held the promise of veracity and evidence. They were seen as the reproduction of reality, able to provide an objective facsimile of the original. Certainly now, the objective nature of photographs is no longer assumed, and digital images online, easily manipulated with simple software, have not made this issue any clearer. Today, photo archives are not really used for memory aids or as comparisons for art historians. They're simply not needed in that way. Interestingly, though, it is precisely the nature of photographs as snapshots in time, as a fixed point from which history unfolds backward and forward in time, from the instant the shutter opens and closes, that imbues photo archives with much of their current worth. However, photograph archives today are often seen as a distant memory of art history as it was once practiced, a quaint trip back to connoisseurship, but no longer a vital tool in today's research. For some collections, it is no easy task to envision how these photos could be used by new generations of researchers. The Courtauld, though, is imagining new users of all types and is developing tools and programs to not only aid, but also attract users. One such tool is visual searching, in which the user starts with an image instead of words that is matched against the institution's collection and also matched to open source libraries and images scraped from the web. Another idea is that of a roving digitization studio on wheels, as in a truck, not the actual truck. The moving studio will bring parts of the Conway collection of architectural photos to regional locations to engage local groups interested in photography, history, and/or architecture. However, the history and historical uses of the collections have not been neglected. Digital access to the Courtauld will replicate how photo boxes were accessed in person, physically pulled from the shelf in an alphabetical arrangement. This preserves the original context of the collection in digital form and nods to the historical uses of the archives. The Paul Mellon Center, dealing with smaller though very rich collection, is grappling with the issues surrounding providing access to images from private collections, a very indispensable and often hidden resource in the field. The Paul Mellon Center is also thinking about the possibilities of automatic connections and links between photos, artists, works of art, and collections in a linked open data environment and an online space that facilitates coordinated research. Are these things really important at all? Photo archives retain importance to the field, and some proof lies in the myriad of ways in which art libraries teach its users about the collections. Photo archives of many institutions are part of bibliographic instruction for staff members. They are also a component of onboarding, induction, or welcome days for new institutional staff. And the photo archives are often included in orientations for visiting scholars. Some collections, like the MPG, have plans to include all or portions of their visual collections in the public version of the library's catalog, and to even integrate user searches across different sections of the institution: archives, library, museum collections. Photo archive collections are often now included in orientations for students and classes, and the MPG has specific orientation sessions for their sitter boxes, and it participates in a history day that connects researchers with the outside public. For most institutions, the users of these collections have been collectors, dealers, and art historians. Most recently, the art historians have largely left the picture, and art dealers make up a high percentage of users. But there really is so much more potential for art historians, historians of all types, and the general public. These collections are important now to a small group of dedicated users, but it is the potential for new uses in a digital environment that really makes these collections poised to reinvent again how art historical scholarship is conducted. There is remarkable work being done in London art libraries that anticipates new users, new use, and how to aid digital scholarship. Much of the work revolves around photo archives and visual collections. None of the photo collections have nearly the same staff levels that they enjoyed in their heyday, so the research, planning, and implementation of project is achieved on shoestring budgets with skeletal staff. There's always an eye on cost-benefit analysis, which is hard to reconcile when potential benefits are still mostly unrealized. The art institutions in London are some of the oldest and most significant in the world, and their attendant libraries are steeped in traditions that make change and innovation difficult. However, I am greatly encouraged by the efforts of art libraries large and small to meet the evolving needs of their students and researchers, often in the digital realm. Adopting linked open data protocols and the integration of these collections within research space outside of the institutional silos are all key. There are certainly challenges. Art libraries have been facing staffing and budgetary challenges almost as long as they have existed, and this type of work takes dedication and commitment from the institution. But most would probably agree that the potential for impacting future scholars to this extent doesn't happen every day. The search for ever more veracity and reproductions created an intimate relationship between photography and art history, and now changing notions of photographic evidence coupled with digital tools and online connections and discovery are on the verge of reinventing the photo archive for new types of users. So to answer my 3 questions, does anyone really comb through these dusty boxes? Yes, they do. Certainly not as many as once did, and not even for the same reasons as they did decades ago, but they do. Will anyone ever open these boxes again? Well, maybe not. Maybe not the dusty boxes, but the online images in the boxes will be opened electronically by children, students, researchers, teachers, librarians, art dealers, bus drivers, and stay-at-home dads. And they will be used in traditional art historical ways, as well as in ways that we can't even imagine. Are these things important at all? Well, if you've been paying attention at all, you already know the answer to that final question. Thanks very much.
Hi, thanks for all of those presentations. They were great. I'd like to ask a question to Leila, Hudda, and Laurence first. Particularly to Hudda, just to say it's fantastic to see a presentation that cites Ngugi Thiong'o, Elijah Equiano, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I know you're a bit tight for time, but I wondered if the 3 of you could perhaps talk a little bit about the participants' responses to the workshop.
We had a really small group because we wanted to really engage with people. And the way that we designed the workshop, as we were trying to talk about tactility, I think it really linked as well with what Ting, you were saying about the way how you used your experience in creating the walking tour, like actually looking at the books and trying to make sure that link. We wanted to have a way that people could access knowledge who didn't have an academic background per se, and especially those people who felt maybe perhaps disengaged from libraries. So many of the people that came were the first times that they ever used the library. And it's funny for us to say, but we did get very good feedback from people. Leila, you always speak about this one experience.
Yeah, there was one particular person, I think that his experience there made the whole thing, I think for all of us, probably very worthwhile, in that it started the day and he came along thinking it was going to be a very traditional library induction, which is nothing wrong with that, but he came, his aim was to learn how to use a library. And some of the points where we had to sort of chop up text, he was sitting next to me, and this is where I think that the librarian role never leaves you, even when you're a participant, because we were both, I was chopping up some text, and he said to me, this is anarchy. So this is like, we're chopping up someone's knowledge, and I tried to explain that it was okay, but perhaps he sensed that I was still a librarian. But then Hudda came and spoke to him, and suddenly he's like, yeah, I get it. And he was just chopping up the text, and what really was great, he chopped up some of the printouts from our presentation as well, and he included it in the book. And at the end of it, he basically, I had to renew his library card this week because he's in the library all the time, and he loves the library. And for me, and that's just the most important thing, that at the end of it he said, I didn't know, I mean it's very upsetting actually, but he said he didn't know this world existed.
Yeah, and just to go, it's not that we have this sort of rampant disregard for the work inside the library, but we were trying to share that these books are produced pieces of knowledge and that we're all involved in this production.
And we weren't chopping up the books, we were chopping up
photocopies. But the idea that we can all use these works together, that we can make something from this. And I think on all the presentations, we were talking about sort of the business of knowledge production. How do we pay for people to research things? How do we, what's the kind of the ethics behind the kind of institutions that we have? And we were having a sort of personal conversation as well about, the new funding stream, especially now with Brexit and everything like that. Like, how are these institutions even going to be surviving in their present state? Never mind, the kind of problems that we've been having historically. And then how do different people enter into those projects? Like, as myself as an independent artist and researcher, and Ting as well, your sort of experience as well, the questions that you were asking about sort of, is this sufficient amount of money? So we can't sort of romanticize the library and think of this kind of beautiful space where just all these things magically appear, but there's kind of systems behind it, sustaining knowledge, and how are we involved in there. So at the very least, we should be able to do something with this, because it is a production. I hope that answered.
I was going to say, one thing I just wanted to say, this was actually an induction as well. So apart from the critical side, we did actually learn, people did actually learn how to use the library as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. More questions? Jessica?
Thanks. That was also for your team. I was really interested in the inductions for staff, especially what you said about maybe librarians aren't the best person. I mean, I work in two ostensibly quite radical libraries, Goldsmiths and Centre St. Martin's, and neither have that in place, that staff that clean and work in security have access to resources, and it's something we're pushing for. And once we're over that barrier, I was wondering what your inductions for staff look like.
Yeah. Sorry, is it inductions for academic? Sorry, I didn't really.
Or outsourced staff.
Outsourced staff. Well, this is something we were. It's an ongoing situation. I'm a member of the union IWGB, Laurence, and we know a lot of the outsourced staff personally, and we work with them and very much see them as our colleagues. But you may be aware there is a sort of campaign going to bring them all in-house, and we just feel very uncomfortable that some of the things they can come in and clean the building, but maybe not make full use of the facilities. So we did put a call out to our union through a union meeting, and we were very hopeful that the staff would come in and then we could get them encouraged to start using the place where they work in a different way and seeing that they're part of it as well. So it's maybe in some ways symbolic act as well, because they're still fighting to be brought in-house, but we were hopeful for that. As Laurence said, we unfortunately didn't manage to get anyone on this particular workshop come in from IWGB, the outsourced workers. We think that's, as Laurence said as well, partly because we didn't think enough about the dual language and having a translator in place. And also the day, it's a Saturday, it's a day of, either a day when you're doing another job or your one very special rare day off where you might not want to go and sit in a library and start critiquing things. I mean, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something, I think this format could work very well. I mean, the union meetings, we have a bilingual, there's lots of there's lots of talking, lots of dialogue. So I think the format is there in principle. I think it's a case of whether they want to spend that time. But I think we have to offer that to them. Particularly, we have this kind of idea of we have Latin American political pamphlets in the collection, which I think would be a really, really interesting thing that people might be interested in, particularly thinking about the way the union operates and the sort of histories of struggle that we're keeping in boxes, Anyway, I don't know if that answers.
Work in progress.
Yeah.
You want to say anything? Thank you. Any more questions, please? Hi.
Thank you. It's not a question, it's just an addition to what Kraig said about the Paul Mellon Centre, that part of the reason that people weren't able to use it in the last few years is that half of it's been off-site, but we have had quite a few requests for it, so we're keeping a list of those requests, and it's currently being digitised along with the Yale Centre's images, so it'd be interesting for all of us to see how people use them once they have been digitised, and different access points are being looked at the moment, how we make them available to the widest possible audience. I agree with Kraig, they're not dead things, they're very, very much useful.
Thank you, Emma. Any other questions? Well, I'll ask one if I'm allowed as chair. Kraig, can I ask you, in your travels and in your research in these picture libraries, I know that your research was primarily focusing on, if you like, art historical research uses, but do you encounter any examples of this material being used with artists or by artists in artist-led projects, even as physical material?
No, I really haven't found that, Gustavo. But I think, I didn't visit every photo archive collection in London, but some of the largest ones. But I think providing more avenues for discovery for these types of collections opens it up to all those different types of uses that certainly artists would definitely take advantage of.
How would you see using physically these collections if they, for instance, no longer have use in research as physical material for an artwork, for instance?
Oh, well, I'm not sure. As the librarian and keeper of these collections, I wouldn't necessarily want to try and anticipate how an artist might use it, because who knows how they might be used, and they may be used in ways in how the collection was built. They may be used for the images themselves in some ways, or the changing in images over time. So it's hard to say how. I haven't thought how artists might be able to use it in the future, but I'm sure there are uses. I mean, if an artist can create pathways through the collections in books, and then I'm sure they can use photo collections in really interesting and innovative ways. Sure.
Okay, I think we have time for a final question. Nick? Well, sorry. Nick, do you mind if we... No, it's fine. Yeah, a question at the front, please. Sorry, Nick.
My question's for Stephanie and Ting. Do you think that libraries offer a really unique opportunity for artists to exhibit in as like a sort of a different space to the traditional kind of standard gallery space? Do you think it gives something extra to an artist to be able to exhibit in that space?
Did you hear that, Ting? Okay, well, I'm gonna say yes, definitely. But generally, I think that exhibitions in places outside of White Cube galleries are way more interesting anyway. and they engage like way more people than just your like usual audiences. So yeah.
Nick, it's a quick question.
It was for Ting as well, so.
Okay, I think we have to stop here, but thank you again to the speakers. That was a wonderful panel. Thank you very much.